if there are new areas, new features being developed, new updates coming, that we're covering them and that we have the capacity to cover them. And then we work with the technical writers on coaching, on removing blockers, on finding support if they are overwhelmed and need help.
Welcome to the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast, where Gowri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Jason Christie, Documentation Team Lead at Shopify. Welcome, Jason, to the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me.
Super. Thank you. I'm doing great as well. So, Jason, I did introduce a very little information about yourself, but please feel free to add a little bit more about your introduction, and also how did you initially got into documentation, please?
Sure. Having listened to a few episodes of the podcast now, I can say my journey to technical writing was quite typical. I started pursuing a degree in English literature and creative writing, and did a master's degree in that, but then realized I needed to find some work to pay the bills, and searched around for what I could do that would build on the skills I developed in the university system, and found a post about technical writing and applied and got that job, and the rest is kind of history from there. So that was with a company in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, where they had clients like Costco and Walmart and other international retailers. So it was sort of a trial by fire because I'd never done technical writing before. And the interesting thing about that company is they'd never had a technical writing before. So we sort of just stared at each other from across the table and made up what the role would be. And the thing that I found while working there was that it felt like the opportunities were limitless for technical writing. And so I stuck with it and have been doing it for about 14 years now. So.
Wow, that's awesome, Jason. 14 years, and I do know that you are with Shopify for 5 years. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. Yeah. So I've been working at Shopify for 5 years, and one of those years I worked as a technical writer, and then 4 of those years I've been a team lead.
Wow. Great. So, Jason, I know 5 years is quite a lot of time, but I'm sure there's lots to discuss in terms of documentation processes and how things normally work with Shopify. So can you help me a little bit about those topics? Like, what's the documentation process at Shopify, and who do you normally involve in defining such processes?
Yeah, I'd love to chat about that. So we follow DOCSIS code philosophy with our writing currently. And that means we use a developer workflow and follow kind of the development process. And we use developers' tools to do our writing. So the writers on the team use text editors or code editors. They use Git to push their changes up to GitHub. And then in GitHub, we do all of our reviewing and editing, and we deploy to the Help Center site from there, or our other endpoints. And we work in a sort of very heavily modified agile manner that lets us share the work easily amongst the technical writers and support each other. And we made the shift because previously we'd worked in a more siloed manner where we had a tech writer dedicated to each area of content, and found that not only did that not scale effectively, but it put an unfair burden on some writers while letting other ones sort of have a more manageable time of it. In order to resolve that, we moved to what I call the heavily modified agile methodology. And essentially, it just means we share our work. We have a Kanban board where we can see our work moving through our various pipelines that we've identified. And that allows anybody in the team to pick work and to comment on work that's underway. And so we found that has increased our ability to go from needing to document a feature to shipping the documentation on time much more effectively. So
that's great. So that it's really interesting to know how you are using agile methodology in documentation. So I think my next question will help us understand a little bit more about your workflow. So I know working in siloed entities doesn't help much. So how do you manage your documentation workflow?
Yeah, so we use the Kanban board for sort of visualizing it. And at Shopify, things move fairly fast. And as a result, we can't have a single point of failure where a manager or somebody on the team would be the intake for all of the work that's coming. So to address that, we have the technical writers embedded on all of the development teams, and they work very closely with developers, with product managers, and support personnel. And so they really are the first sort of intake for the work. They understand what's changing in their area of content. And through working with the development teams, they set their own deadlines and understand the timelines involved. And then as leads, we just make sure that if there are new areas, new features being developed, new updates coming, that we're covering them and that we have the capacity to cover them. And then we work with the technical writers on coaching, on removing blockers, on finding support if they are overwhelmed and need help, and making sure that they have everything that they need to do the job that they have to do. And so, yeah, we meet sort of occasionally to review all of the work and our processes and make sure that they're still effective. And then we use the Kanban board to make sure that the work is visible and easily shared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So I know you mentioned about reviewing the work and making sure the right level of documentation is in place. So while reviewing or while defining the documentation, what are the important factors you and your team consider so that the documentation produced addresses the customer's questions or the features that you're building?
We do a subject matter review with developers or product managers and make sure that it aligns with the update or feature that's being released. And we're embedded in, or we're located in our support organization. So we have a method of collecting feedback from our support advisors, so we can understand better what we need to do with any particular piece of documentation. It's also a way that we find out that things are wrong often by hearing the complaints come in and getting notes from our users, which is very helpful. And then we have a small team of editors who will do a review before anything is published, and that helps us align to our style guide and make sure that tone and things like that are being considered.
Yep. Great. And we know, we spoke about this in the beginning of the conversation that you involve developers and you work very much closely with the different teams in creating documentation. Mm-hmm. So where do you stand on the idea that writers and developers should both feel the same level of ownership of the same piece of documentation?
Well, that's a big question. I think I think theoretically, it would be wonderful if everyone cared as much about the documentation as we do. I think that there is a model out there where everybody can contribute to the documentation, and make updates and ship changes, and the technical writing team becomes more a hub for curating, for editing, reviewing, ensuring standards are met, and I think that is interesting. I think there should be a high degree of collaboration, certainly between developers, product managers, designers, and that can go two ways. So not only about the documentation, but about the product itself.
Yeah.
Technical writers are often incredible advocates for users because we are thinking from beginning to end how a person would interact with this piece of software or this feature that's being developed. And so we're not necessarily interested in solving problems. So if there's an interesting development problem, a developer might be focused on how do I resolve this in the most elegant way and write the best code I can. And the designer might think, how do I make sure that this looks great and adheres to our brand and all of those things. And then the writer will be at the back of the room with their hand up saying, this isn't working. Step 7 breaks. And everyone will turn and look at them. And maybe it's the first time they've seen the technical writer.
Yeah.
But I think we have a part to play there. And so what we try and set up is that kind of reciprocal relationship and build the trust with the developers and development teams so that they will do a review or pay attention to the documentation. And at Shopify, it's not a hard sell. Everyone is very caring, and we care about our merchants very deeply. So it's often easy to get people to care and to pay attention.
Mm-hmm. True. So I think I would like to just echo on the same question, and you might have already explained to me, but I just want to again emphasize on this point, like how important is it for you to have writers integrating with development teams? Why do you think it's an important aspect in the whole documentation field?
So I'm a big believer in that. I like that a lot. And I understand it doesn't necessarily work everywhere, but at Shopify, we're continuously deploying the product, and we are highly iterative. And so there isn't necessarily a release schedule that we're all building towards. There aren't necessarily versions that go out that we can easily plan for. So we need to stay as nimble as possible to anticipate what's being developed and when it's shipping. And as a result, I say 12 heads are better than one. So if 12 people know the work that's being done in their various areas, then we can collaborate on making sure that the work gets done that needs to be done for whatever deadline is coming up. And so having the writers embedded on the development teams means they are in the design sprints, they're in the planning meetings, they're in the team meetings, the show and tells. They are the source of truth for us, for what's being shipped, and can build a documentation from there. That solves the problem of continuous deployment, because there isn't really a single source you can go to say, oh, this is shipping in 3 weeks and this is under development and should ship in 6 months. And then build out your sort of work plan backwards from those dates. So I think for us, this aligns neatly to the pace and type of development that we have to work with. But I understand that might not work everywhere. But it's been highly effective for us.
True. Very true, Jason. So I know you are the best person to ask this question as well, because you said the beginning of your career, you were there and setting up all the processes. So what efforts have you made in your career to streamline the documentation process?
Yeah, that's something I definitely think about a lot. In my first role, when I'd never been a technical writer, and the company had never had one, it was very interesting because I got to try a lot of things, and they kind of just let me discover and explore, which was a real gift when I look back and think about it. So there, I was responsible for the help centers for the various sites that we were building for our clients. And I realized that at the time, all of the help documentation was written in Microsoft Word and then formatted there and then given to a developer who would do their best to approximate the layout and formatting of the Microsoft Word doc that we'd given them. And that was very slow, very inefficient. It meant developers were taking time away from what they should be working on, which is the product, to do this. So I learned how to do HTML and CSS and built my own little module for the help content that I was responsible for from beginning to end. And that meant I had a higher degree of control over what everything, the formatting, the style, the tone, everything was sort of under one person. So that was easy to change or roll out to different clients as we got them. So that was a place where we had a highly inefficient process, and I found a way to make it incredibly efficient by cutting out a few steps in the process.
Fantastic.
And it was great. Yeah. So at Shopify, I think I touched on it earlier, but the moving away from the siloed style that we'd kind of inherited and exploring ways to be more collaborative has significantly helped with keeping up with the pace of development and the growth at Shopify. And it means that writers on the team are happier because they have more support and can share work and collaborate more easily. So
nice. It's really great to see how one can change things, right? Either it being your first job or if it's an established process, how things can get gradually improved by sticking to the process. So yeah, that's really very nice to hear, Jason, your achievements and the changes that you made in your career at various places. So let's talk about your team structure a little bit here, if you are fine. So how do you report on your documentation and your reporting lines? How many team members do you have in Shopify?
Yeah, so we're a fairly large team. I think there are almost 30 of us, and it's the first time in my career I've had a team. I've always been the solo technical writer, trying to make everything work, and it was really nice to have a team to lean on and learn from. So
yeah. That's a different, it brings a different challenges at the same time, but again, it makes you feel like you're part of a big team, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have almost 30 people on the documentation team, and the documentation team itself is comprised of smaller teams. So we have a DevDocs team that handles the API documentation and theme customization documentation for Shopify. So they do the sort of code heavy developer facing material. And we have what we call merchant docs. And that's a team of writers that I lead who are responsible for all the help and how-to information for using the software and using Shopify's products. And then we also have a video team, and they create support videos and publish them to YouTube. So my part of that, the merchant docs, I think we have 13 people right now. So still a fairly large team within a larger team.
True. 13 people is quite a lot, I should say, Jason.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, I think a lot of my guests, they like this question too. So in your opinion, what has been the most important innovation when it comes to document tracking during your career?
Oh, that is interesting. I've been in the game long enough to sort of remember things we used to do back in the early days. I think DOCSIS code is really the first thing that came along that kind of surprised me or shook things up, and it's led to a whole different way of looking at documentation, involving documentation in in development, which I find quite fascinating. And I think it builds on the success of sort of things like frameworks like DITA, while preserving some of the flexibility and creativity that people kind of seek for presenting their content and organizing their content. And so I think that's quite novel and quite interesting. Last year at Write the Docs for Portland, there were a couple of talks that revolved around this idea of docs as data. So taking docs as code a little bit further. And I found that particularly inspiring because I see this shift happening where our content will need to be more modular and capable of being shared to various endpoints. Some we might not be able to predict right now. But the one in particular that I keep thinking about is voice search. As our screens get smaller for where we're doing our work or using products online, and digital assistants become more powerful, I think voice search is going to be a big help. And watching my children use our Google Home, for example, I can see that that could be completely normal for them in 5 to 10 years to start with the voice search and not with a browser window. And so I think, approaching things where you load your content into a database, it's machine readable, it's accessible for developers, opens up a whole range of interesting opportunities that are a little harder to get to if you're working maybe in a less structured manner. So I think those are some of the interesting things that I'm kind of thinking about in terms of how you organize your documentation and deploy it.
Yep. That's quite a lot of deep thinking there, and Jason, I should say. I think one thing I haven't understood is your documentation a publicly available one, or is it a private one that only your customers, when logged in, can use?
So it is publicly available. It's all at help.shopify.com. And
so are you aware of any organic search traffic being generated?
So all of our search is, almost all of it is organic, which is very interesting. We have really strong SEO, and our site ranks quite highly for keywords and search results that, and then that drives a lot of traffic to our site.
Fantastic. That's great to know, Jason. So I think we are almost done with the general questions and general section. Before we move to the rapid fire round, any other points you would like to add to our audience, or we can straight jump into rapid fire round?
I've been looking forward to the rapid fire round, so I think right. I'm ready to try that.
Super. So here we go. Who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
One of your former guests, Tom Johnson, has inadvertently taught me a lot. I read his blog and have been following his site for quite a while. And the API course that he put together is top notch. It's quite good. So I regularly share articles from him with my team, and yeah, he's sort of been a cornerstone for me for understanding technical writing and what's changing in the industry. So,
thank you. Can you share a documentation related resource you have consumed recently? I know what's going to come, but I'm sure you'll add some more.
Yeah, I sort of always go to Docs Like Code by Ann Gentle. Big part of the Docs as Code kind of philosophy. And that's been very useful. The other, it's not necessarily a resource, but like the Write the Docs organization has lots of resources available, and so I regularly sort of pay attention to them, and we'll follow up on things that I discover through the conferences or the conversations that I have around the Write the Docs.
Super. That's brilliant, Jason. So my last question is, what is the one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
I would say be curious, stay curious. There's really so many creative ways to solve problems using documentation or related to the documentation, and you can always reinvent the way that you deliver your documentation. So keeping up with industry changes, with opportunities, technological advances, there's really an endless amount of information you can bring to bear on how you deliver your documentation, how you write it. So really just, stay curious and keep exploring all of the different options that are out there.
Fantastic. So, Jason, I think we are at the end of our conversation, but I really like the way you have brought in agile methodology into documentation, and also, collaborative working between different team members, especially development team, product managers, and technical writers. So, I think in the last 20-25 minutes, we have learned quite a lot. Anything else you would like to add to our audiences today, Jason?
No, I'd encourage them to check out your backlog of episodes. There's a wealth of knowledge there too. So I just wanted to say thank you for having me on the podcast today, Gowri. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Jason, for you spending your time. And I'm sure you must have prepared for this as well. And once again, thank you to all our guests who made this journey incredible and making this podcast series a great success. So, but again, thank you, Jason, for participating in this podcast series, and have a great day.
Thank you. You as well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.